A very good evening, Mr. Tushar Vrind, Director Samsung Semiconductor India Research. It's a great pleasure to welcome you virtually to NIT Rourkela. Mr. Tushar Vrind will be delivering a talk on connecting dots from current state of 5G to B5G and 6G. So let us all welcome Mr. Tushar Vrind. Let me read out a brief biodata of Mr. Vrind. Mr. Vrind is a technical director at Samsung Semiconductor India R&D. He is the past chair of communication and connectivity COE at SSIR. Mr. Vrind has around 20 years of professional experience on the cellular modem, 2G to 5G and embedded domain, especially with the Exynos system on chip SoC of System LSI Devices Solutions at Samsung Electronics. He has over 30 plus applied patents and over 50 plus grants worldwide in the area of embedded systems and wireless protocols. Mr. Vrind has co-authored over 25 technical contributions and paper submitted to 3GPP and IEEE. Mr. Vrind is a notable innovator, entrepreneur, a technologist at SSIR. He is also a senior member of IEEE and member Executive Committee at IEEE ComSoc Bangalore chapter. His current research interests are in the area of wireless communication for beyond 5G and 6G cellular systems. Thank you, Mr. Tushar, for accepting our invitation and giving your precious time to join us for this program. Can you switch on your video, please, Mr. Tushar?
Hello. You see me?
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you so much again. So you can now address and deliver the talk. Thank you.
Okay, madam. Thanks a lot for the warm welcome and a nice read of the bio. This sounded good. Yeah. Okay, ma'am. Thanks a lot. I think I'll switch off my camera because of bandwidth issue.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
No problem in that. You can share your slides.
Do I need to be okay? I can share right away. Okay. One second. Are my slides visible?
Yes. Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, welcome all. I think my talk is, I've been given a topic to connect the dots from 5G, beyond 5G and 6G. Okay, while I work for Samsung Semiconductor India R&D Center, I believe I'm still learning. I mean, yeah, and whatever I have learned over the course of last 15, 20 years across the different RADs or radio access technologies from 2G to 5G. I'll probably share and maybe I can share my learning with all of you. And if you have any questions, maybe I will be able to take it at the end. Do we have time for questions? I mean, how much time do I have, madam, overall?
Yeah, you can go for 1 hour presentation and after that question answer session. Okay. 10 minutes, another 10 minutes.
Okay, fine. Sounds good. Thanks a lot. All right. So broadly, what I have done, I have structured my talk majorly on, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of other speakers also lined up. And I don't know what is the background you already have on 5G or the older generation 4G. So I'll quickly try to capture the key changes from a fourth generation communication to a fifth generation communication in terms of how. So most of my talk is around how it is looked from a third generation partnership project, or the 3GPP as we know. So what are the changes in the specification from where we were in 4G to what has been added in 5G? And with those changes, what are the challenges that we faced during or we will face during the designing of a user equipment or a handset or a semiconductor or basically a baseband modem and the surrounding ecosystem that powers a handset or a smartphone? We'll look at what are the challenges around that. And we'll also look at some adjacent area to wireless communication as to how 5G has fueled the innovation or how those innovation has pushed 5G to meet certain requirements, and how it has actually evolved to how it will actually evolve towards a beyond 5G and a 6G kind of wireless communication technology. And recently I've done some research on aerial communication, which is basically a flying area network in the 3GPP paradigm, and especially on how a flying drone can serve users. So basically what kind of user to base station equipment link has to be established when the base station is also mobile on an aerial platform. So I have done some research on that, so I'll probably share some of my work and some of my results around it, right? So that's how I have structured. So I hope it's okay. We can proceed with what all contents I have brought in. So I think a lot of the 5G requirement, you might have seen these slides and these three aspects from a lot of other talks or your own self-research that you would have done in the past. So between IMT Advanced, or what we called as the 4G, to the IMT 2020 or the 5G. So by the way, 5G standard just got approved in the month of July this year, even though we started working on this particular technology from 2012 onwards, I think. But finally, the stamp from the authority or ITUR in terms of what is a competing technology and what is the sufficient technology for saying that it is IMT 2020 compliant, the 5G NR specification by 3GPP is what is being standardized. I mean, is what is being accepted by the forum. So if you look at the broadly the requirements, there are various vectors, right? So we talk about the peak data rate, right? So which is basically going from a 1 Gbps peak data rate that was supported in a IMT Advanced or a 4G network to a 20 Gbps peak data rate. So basically, if all of the data rate we want to concentrate on one user, how much is the expected growth? So it's about 20 times jump. If you look at the experience data rate, so that is like when saying that the network is slightly loaded, what is the experienced data rate that any user can expect? So we felt that we know that in case of LTE, it can be around 10 megabit per second. And in case of 5G, it has to go up to 100 megabit per second. So that's the kind of difference in requirement. Similarly, if you look at spectrum efficiency in terms of bits per second per hertz, there is a 3x expectation of, there was 3x push towards 5G. And even if you talk about mobility support, like what kind of mobility from a user needs to be supported in terms of how frequently or how seamlessly it hands over from one terrestrial base station to the other terrestrial base station. In case of LTE, we have about 350 km per hour, and 5G, it can go up to 500 km per hour. Latency is basically how much time it takes for end-to-end, or basically how much time it takes for the user to be able to send data to the network and back and coming back. So for 4G, it was about 10 millisecond data plane latency that should be brought down to 1 millisecond data latency to enable certain latency use cases. Similarly, if you look at connection density, or basically if you talk about Internet of Things or machine type communication, there was an expectation of 10x increase from 10 raised to 5 devices per kilometer square to a 10⁶ kilometer per devices per kilometer square. Also, the network efficiency should have increased. I mean, when you say increased, it should become more efficient. So it should be less power consuming than the previous generation. Similarly, the traffic capacity, we talked about peak data rate and user experience data rate. Another vector is the area traffic capacity, like how much data rate can be offered per meter square. So there should be 0.1 Mbps in case of LTE to about 10 Mbps in case of 5G. So all of these diverse requirements were actually bucketized under three sub areas, which first one is all about capacity, and we talk about enhanced mobile broadband from that perspective. And this is just an example that how 4G on a 4G system, if you want to download some high definition 150 GB hard disk HD or high definition video, it takes about 240 seconds, whereas the same 15 GB high definition video would take about 6 seconds in case of 5G. So it's a straight, I mean, it's just an average bitrate comparison. So it's about a 40th fraction of how much time it takes in 4G. Similarly, the rest of the requirements about increasing the reliability and improving the low latency is termed and bucketized under ultra reliable low latency communication. So we can, with this kind of a feature, there can be use cases of remote robot control or having completely autonomous vehicles and interactive gaming enabled. So this is another example which shows that if a vehicle were using 4G and there was a command for it to stop, it takes about 14, it will probably take 14 meter of latency in terms of distance to actually stop. Where if you look at 5G, it would be about 2.8 centimeter, which is like instant stop, right? I mean, if we remove the mechanical overhead and the braking capacity, this is the kind of latency that can be improved in terms of ultra reliable low latency. Similarly, on the massive machine type communication, we see that there are smart city and smart agriculture use cases which will require higher number of devices per kilometer square, and that 10x improvement really pushes the limit to the kind of sensing or the kind of Internet of Things capability that can come from 5G. So these are just three vectors, but that doesn't mean this is sufficient. There could be certain use cases. For example, a machine type communication may still require reliability, right? So it is a crossover. Or maybe there is an enhanced mobile broadband, certain gaming kind of use cases which requires capacity as well as latency. So it's a crossover. So those kind of possibilities are also there. So this was chosen just to largely say that these are the new buckets which should be supported by 5G. So that's overall in the requirements and performance. And when these requirements were given out by ITU in terms of IMT 2020 requirements, the certain approach on the standard is to solve by the change in the specification by applying newer techniques at the physical layer, medium access control layer, or even at the higher layers, or even in the network architecture, or how the network should be deployed. Because certain things like latency is also solved by changing the way the network is shared, or the network is probably deployed. So how do we distribute the network nodes? Also bring in certain advantages which will probably help us achieve these kind of requirements. So that's broadly how the specification understands and they address. So if you look at the next slide, so this captures the physical layer features that were changed or enhanced in 5G in comparison to LTE. So one of the most important thing is about the capacity or improving the spectral efficiency, right? So and also improve the coverage to some extent by using a technique called beamforming on massive MIMO. So massive MIMO, while massive MIMO can be used in the lower band. I mean, when I say lower band, it is lower than the millimeter wave, which is a new what you call spectrum that was added for 5G. So as we know that when you talk about fatter pipes, the easiest thing to do is to increase the bandwidth or increase the channel size, in that sense that you can have a fatter pipe to push data into, right? So when you talk about frequency, when you talk about bandwidth, the carrier frequency that you have in LTE, for example, is is around 3 gigahertz max. It spans between 1 gigahertz and 3 gigahertz. But in 5G, there was a new band that was completely added, which is termed as millimeter wave, or the lower band of millimeter wave, about around 30 gigahertz. So there are two technologies that can be looked at from that perspective. So one is the beamforming, which is primarily used in the millimeter wave. But this improves the coverage, it improves the spectral efficiency, and also achieves giving a higher range to the millimeter wave technology, because by the nature of millimeter wave, because of the path loss, it cannot reach a larger distance, right? So there is a technique called beamforming, which was applied in millimeter wave. So that is one of the key technologies that was added. And in terms of lower band, or basically the sub 3 gigahertz, which is also called as sub 6 gigahertz in the NR or 5G paradigm, there is a technique called massive MIMO, which basically requires higher order antenna at both RX and TX, or the transmitter and receiver, to help increase basically the amount of data that can be pushed. So that these two technologies were added in case of 5G. And if you look at so in terms of power saving, since we know that in 5G, and I'll talk about it, basically the what you call the carrier band is pretty big in terms of, in LTE, if it is 20 megahertz. In case of 5G, it can go up to 100 megahertz. So basically, what that means is the user equipment has to look for its allocation across the entire spectrum, right, in the entire band. So that's how it was done in LTE. The entire 20 megahertz of the entire carrier band, there could be control channels for the user from where it needs to decode and at what frequency and time it can actually transmit. So in case of NR, it becomes too big. So they thought about doing an adaptive bandwidth, or what they call as a bandwidth part. So a certain user equipment can only be given a part of the bandwidth. So that's another technique through which the power saving benefit can be brought in. So if you're not really needing high capacity, you can still have a bandwidth part, and you can just go and look for your control channels and your data channel allocation there. Now, there are new concepts. I mean, these are older concepts in terms of channel coding. As far as the literature is concerned, and a lot of you are researchers here, you will already know that LDPC or the polar code were available in literature from a long time. But with NR, there was a need to do faster processing, because the amount of data itself is too much, right? So there was a need to do advanced channel coding and ensure that you're able to have a low latency in terms of decoding complexity, right? So that's where these kind of new coding techniques were added up into the 5G standard. Also, there was a lean system design. Again, we talked about some part of the UE bandwidth, and also we'll talk about in the next slide in terms of how the system information is made on demand, and it doesn't always push everything on the control channels, right? So those kind of advancements were brought in into the 5G technology to meet these requirements. Now, there is also a concept of flexible multi-numerology support. So we talked about the three verticals, right? We talked about enhanced mobile broadband. We talked about ultra reliable, low latency, and it also talked about we talked about massive machine type communication. So all of these three have different kind of frame structures that these 5G specification has designed. And then they multiplex it in the time domain, as in sometimes it could be allocation for EMB, sometimes it can be allocation for ultra reliable low latency, and sometimes it's an allocation for machine type communication. So that flexibility in the numerology helps achieve all the three simultaneously. While in LTE, the numerology was fixed. So we could not do dynamic these kind of I mean, it was a fixed pattern in case of LTE. Well, why? Because when it was the requirements were taken, the ultra reliable low latency kind of requirements were not really in the forefront at that point of time. We just wanted to get capacity and higher throughput in those cases. So here, if you see, there are different numerology in terms of the subcarrier spacing. So as we know, some of you may know from your physical layer background that if you have basically a larger subcarrier spacing, then the what you call the symbol becomes shorter. And if that happens, then you can do faster transmissions and faster retransmissions. So this also there is a certain aspect of the computing power which has increased from the 4th generation to the 5th generation, and we'll talk about that in our challenges and the kind of adjacent changes that is happening in the space of CPUs and processors. So they also ride on how the processing has enhanced, and based on that there is a certain transmission and retransmission pattern that can be applied, based on which the latency problem can also be solved. Right. So these are some of the key techniques that I wanted to touch upon. Now, if you look at, OK, so while the physical layer has always been an enabler for any technology, there are certain aspects of medium access control which can help reduce the latency, or which can help improve the quality of service, or it can make the system lean or power efficient. Right. So if you look at the key Mac features, so we have this fast data processing in a multi-Gbps environment, where if you compare with LT, in LT, the user equipment needed to wait for a grant for it to start transmitting. And I mean, of course, the grant is always required to transmit, but even the packet generation happens only when packet generation only happens when you have the grant in case of LT, but that was taken away in 5G, and they talked about advanced packet creation. So the PDCP layer and the radio link control RLC layer and MAC layer could actually start creating packets in advance. And also the reordering function was only was moved to PDCP, and there was no concatenation in RLC that was applied in 5G. So all of this helps in improving the real-time processing of the packet, and the packets are ready beforehand, and the moment the grant comes in, immediately transmission happens. So this simplifies the data processing and helps reach the kind of data rate requirements of multi Gbps in case of 5G. So that's something that I want to talk about. Now, they also applied a new concept of handling quality of service. So there is a so in case of LTE there is a concept of QCI, but in case of 5G they added something called a QoS flow. So with this QoS flow, a QoS could be controlled at every packet. And then depending on the QoS flow, it can be routed to the appropriate bearer. So they have a new layer that they call a service data adaptation protocol layer, which was added in case of 5G to manage the quality of service flows. That was a new element added in 5G. Similarly, if you look at on the radio resource management, or the things like system information broadcast, there's a lot of signaling overhead which was reduced in case of 5G. So there is while the G Node B, or the next generation Node B, which was E Node B in case of LT, does a periodic broadcast of minimum system information, a UE can fetch the additional system information blocks that it needed by doing a random access and getting a grant, and then the system information remaining blocks are transmitted from G Node B. So this is called a system information on demand. So this is a new concept that was added in case of 5G. Now there's also another new state added in RRC, radio resource control layer, which is basically trying to save the configuration that the user equipment has when it enters into connection. So for example, LTE, we have idle, connected, idle state. So you are in idle, the user equipment is in idle, it tries to do a random access, comes into connected state, and then does all its of transactions, and then comes back into idle state. But in case of 5G, they added a new state called inactive, which is basically trying to store the older configuration and resume from that older configuration if there is an immediate or maybe a basically a suboptimal, I mean, not really suboptimal, but an optimal step that, okay, you don't always have to go into a long tail idle to connected, but you can go from connected to inactive and then immediately come to connected, because both the user equipment and the network have saved configuration. So this improves the latency in terms of how soon a user equipment can come into a connected state. And of course, with that, you will have a longer battery life, because you're not transmitting a lot of information like what you were doing in case of LTE. So these are some of the key features in Mac that really helps the user. equipment. Now, in terms of the duplex arrangement of the carrier bandwidth, I think I talked about little bit that we have we have added a new band called in the millimeter wave around 30 gigahertz, and in the lower band 1 gigahertz and 3 gigahertz. The older generation LT coexistence, or basically this is some sort of a spectrum that we have already verified our wireless communication on a terrestrial network already with. So all the sub 1 gigahertz or up to 3 gigahertz is a paired spectrum. So you have a uplink and downlink frequency pair on which transmission and reception happens. And in case of NR, a lot of application is happening in terms of time division duplex. So basically, we try to share the same spectrum, right? And in case of LTE, while we had a 20 megahertz per carrier bandwidth, we can have up to 400 megahertz per carrier bandwidth. So minimum between 5 and 400. And in case of LTE, the minimum was 1.25 megahertz, and it can go up to 20 megahertz. And in LTE, we could only add 5 carriers. But in NR or 5G, we can do 16 carriers. So this actually adds up to 6.4 gigahertz in terms of total available maximum bandwidth, right? So these are some of the changes in terms of the how the frequency spectrum and how the allocation per carrier is different between LTE and NR. Okay, we talked about a flexible numerology benefit, and I think I covered this part in terms of how the higher numerology can make the slot shorter, symbol shorter, and how it can improve the latency. And we also talked about the processing capability of the CPU that helps us do transmission to sub-slot level transmission and even faster retransmission. So this is not basically anything from technology. This is just playing with the processing power of the CPU and being able to do things faster, while the first one is basically able to make the symbol shorter. So this is mostly from tech, but the rest too is mostly from the processing power of the CPU. So this actually in this entire flexible numerical brings down the latency in about 10x in comparison with compared to LTE, right? So that's some of the benefits of making these changes in the physical layer. Now, there is another important concept that we briefly talked was on the beamforming. So, and we talked how the beamforming helps go fast. It's like basically adding phase shifts to every antenna element in a way that all of the what you call the signals that are sent from the antenna elements, they interfere constructively in one direction, and rest of all is cancelled out. Of course, there are some side lobes which we can ignore for now for our discussion, but we'll talk about it later. So there is a focused beam in one direction where the user is. So there is a lot of location, some sort of a knowledge where the user is and trying to focus the beam into that direction. And this also helps in coverage extension. Now, while because the energy is concentrated in one particular direction. Now, this also brings in another advantage. We can do reuse of these, the time and frequency grid, and we can probably use the same time frequency in another spatial direction to another user. So this improves the overall capacity of the system, right? It can offer, it can serve more number of users and with the same time frequency grid. So that's another use case or another benefit of doing beamforming. Now, while we talk about beamforming and we know it is dependent on number of antenna elements, in some sense, the millimeter wave is enabling beamforming because the wavelength is very short. And we know that antenna elements have to at least be spaced lambda by 2. So we're talking about 5 millimeter gap between the two antenna elements. And if you know the overall real estate of a smartphone is good enough for us to pack a lot of such on the backside of the antenna, backside of the device, right? And that can really help us improve the really enable the beamforming in the millimeter wave. So millimeter wave both requires beamforming because it has to be it gives you a better coverage in terms of the length or the distance from the transmitter that you can reach. And it also, by its own nature or by its own physics, helping beamforming get enabled. So both it's like doing both, enabling as well as using it, right? So in that sense. Okay, so beamforming is again of two types. One is called the analog beamforming, where what we do is we apply the phase shifts after the baseband processing, so after the digital to analog conversion happens, each of the each of the antenna element, the beamformer can do a phase shifting. So what essentially it means that all you can at max have one beam, right? Because you have to constructively ensure that all of these antenna elements, the pattern of radiation is constructively getting combined at one of the users. Let's say the user is here, it will try to combine here, but you can do only one of these. So that's a limitation. But yeah, this is one form of analog beamforming. The other form is basically a digital beamforming, where you can apply the phase shifts in the digital domain. So beamformer applies, but then you will have to have a digital to analog converter for each of the antenna element to be to be really able to transmit and make multiple beams. So, but what will happen is if you look at the size of it, maybe we'll probably be able to compare that if you have 5 millimeter. I mean, let's say you have a 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter area, you will require these many DAs, right? So 5 cross 5 DAs, right? At least. So all of these DAs will make that equipment very hot in that sense that it will be a huge power consumption. So this is not really practical. So what I mean, all the companies are today adopting in terms of implementation is what they call a hybrid beamforming. So they are having these clusters of antenna element which they try to to manage in such a form that they can have multiple beams and then do some sort of spatial multiplexing and be able to gain that much of capacity. So that's something that I will also talk about in terms of what are the UV challenges and what are the solutions around it, where we'll talk about the hybrid beamformer and how that is implemented in a design. Okay, so there is another aspect with related to beam is with the beam, you also need to manage the beam because both the user and the eNode B, of course, eNode B is not moving in this because it's a terrestrial network. But in, let's say, when we talk about aerial communication, this beam management will become even more critical because the aerial platform or the terrestrial or the network node can also move. But for here, the argument is the user equipment, when it moves, it has to keep aligning so that the beams, the direction of the beam and the beam is steered in such a manner that the user to the transmitter or basically the base station to the user, the beam is always lashed or it is already connected, right? So that's a continuous fine adjustment so that there's a lot of measurement and feedback that needs to be optimized. And that's where the time domain duplex spectrum really helps because this is a both the uplink and downlink are on the same frequency spectrum, so you can reuse the beam or established beam in one direction in the opposite direction, right? So that's one of the advantages of doing it in time domain duplex arrangement. So that's overall what I wanted to cover in terms of the key technology items. And this is just a summary slide of comparison between 5G and 4G. So we see that while LTE was mostly, or the 4G was mostly in a below 6 gigahertz kind of deployment, the 5G NR is both above 6 gigahertz as well as below 6 gigahertz. We're talking about millimeter wave, and the normal spectrum that we already have well experienced with LTE. So in terms of beamforming, while LTE only supported, so this is from the specification. This doesn't mean the implementation is already available. LTE supports only digital method, but in millimeter wave, both hybrid and digital beamforming is possible. Yeah. And channel coding, we already discussed that we have LDPC and polar. LDPC is primarily used for data and control is using polar. But in case of LTE, it was turbo and tail biting kind of codes. So overall, it brings in low complexity at these kind of bandwidths. Right. Of course, we know turbo is equally efficient for LTE, but maybe it would start becoming not so great if the bandwidth is higher or you have higher code words coming in. Now, if you look at the carrier bandwidth, we talked about 16 carriers possibility in NR, adding up to 6.4 gigahertz. But in LTE, you can only have 5 carriers up to 100 megahertz, like 20 megahertz each. So this, of course, enables high peak throughput. And we talked about the numerology in terms of we have different subcarrier spacing. So all of that subcarrier spacing translates to the slot length. And in a case of LTE, it was a fixed 1 millisecond slot. We could do 0.25, 0.125, and 0.0625 millisecond in case of 5G NR. So this brings in the low latency aspect of the technology. One allied area is the radio access network function split. So there is a centralized and a distributed unit and also a radio unit. So in case of LTE, it was a very monolithic design. So like for if you look at how the ecosystem of suppliers are happening in the RAN space, so CU, DU are usually combined by, or the centralized unit and the distributed unit in the RAN. So all of your PDCP, MAC, RLC and RRC and the core network, if we keep the core apart, these different layers and the radio unit are all coming from the same supplier. So it's a very closed ecosystem. And at max, they try to put the radio unit with the rest of the baseband by using a standard called CPRI. But this is also sometimes not adhered to, and they have a very proprietary design. So this brings in a lot of business or a lot of slow innovation happening in the space of RAN architecture like LT. But what they're talking about in case of 5G is to have a split between CU and DU. So what will essentially happen that you can have a CU from one supplier and DU from another supplier. So it brings in the scalability and flexibility aspect of the RAN, right? So that's something that I'm not covered in my talk further, but yeah, this is something that you can look up, because a lot of work is happening in the Open RAN forum in terms of how the split architecture can be designed. And there are about 7 to 8 different methods to split this at different layers and different sub layers. Right. And we talked about this adaptive bandwidth in terms of the bandwidth part. So we can have a need-based RF bandwidth at UE in case of 5G, while in case of LT, it was a fixed bandwidth of UE. And of course, it helps reduce the power consumption, or at least be as close to LT or a little better than LT in that sense, right? So that's the overall comparison of LTE and 5G. Right. So of course, so we have to talk about deployment. That okay, so since the technology is ready and available and already stamped by ITUR, in terms of how the market is going to adopt it, what we are seeing today is the pre-5G standard was first released in the market. So that was not even a standalone technology. It was basically a slave technology, in the sense that the main carrier is a 4G network, or the main connection is with the 4G, and 5G is added as a dual connectivity or another carrier into it. So the core network is still from 4G, and the 5G, which could be deployed in any of the frequency ranges, FR1 or FR2 or the sub 6 gigahertz or the the millimeter wave, and it kind of augments the user in increasing the bandwidth. So that's the first deployment that we are seeing today. And the second deployment is a standalone system where the 5G can be having its own core, and the user can only be connected to the 5G. Now this is mostly for the data bearer. Now there are other aspects like how you get the voice service. So voice service may still come from 4G. So we'll see a fallback happening from 5G to 4G when you make a voice call. Of course, 5G also supports a voice over NR kind of a standard, but whether that feature is available in the network, we are not seeing a lot of deployment happening in that sense yet. People are still trying to deploy 5G to augment the capacity and give data rate of more than 1 Gbps to a user, right? So that's the kind of drift, or that's the kind of uptake in the market in terms of 5G deployment that we are seeing. So that kind of brings me to the closure of the first topic, where I wanted to look at the key changes in the specification, and then I will probably go and spend some time on what kind of challenges it brings to the user equipment in the receiver design and how are those to be solved. So of course, if you look at the user equipment, we talk about 5G, but the reality is the user is all over the world. He moves from let's say a Southeast Asian country. I'm working with Samsung, so I'll give an example of Korea. Korea is 5G ready, and there are 5G networks, right? So if a user from Korea comes down to India, he'll not see 5G network here. So his device has to support older generation technology also, right? So we need to support LTE. You need to support WCDMA, HSPA, CDMA, GSM, GPRS kind of technologies as well. So all of this brings in humongous challenge that, okay, so it's not only one technology, it's a multi-standard, multi-function device. And in some cases, standard-driven technologies and non-standard driven technologies, right? That has to be supported on a user equipment. And there is a limited design budget and the hardware resource. So we don't have a lot of real estate. If you happen to look at a tear down of any device, you'll see how packed the device is in terms of how many different system on chip components and how many PMICs and how many power management ICs are there. So it doesn't give a lot of room to fit in new technology into it, right? So that's another challenge, that how do we fit the entire 5G technology into certain design or certain real estate budget and yet achieve yet give the user a great experience, right? So that's a very important to discuss. Okay. So if we look at and just bring it down to the system on chip on printed circuit board design, you'll see that our target should be to reduce power area cost of the system on chip, because that's an important metric for any semiconductor supplier to get a design win from any other OEM or any other original equipment manufacturer which makes a smartphone, right? So we have to reduce the footprint of the entire. So if you look on the right side, we'll see there is an application processor which hosts something like an Android system. We have baseband processor which probably implements 5G, LTE, 2G, 3G, and so on and so forth. And there can be many of these. There can be a Wi-Fi, there can be a Bluetooth, there is a memory, on-chip memory, there are connectors, there is a SIM slot. So all of this brings in a lot of challenge. And another thing, we talked about beamforming, right? So what happens is there is a radiation pattern that is built or generated around a smartphone. And if you see that this radiation pattern should be away from the user, it should not go into the user, right? So there should be a lot of sensing happening, that where the user is, how is he holding the device, and what kind of a beam pattern or what kind of a radiation pattern should be there in the user equipment so that it doesn't hurt the user. So this is something called a specific absorption rate, or a SAR, for the device, which has to be low. So if you look at the challenges, we have to implement large scale MIMO at low gigahertz. And it is primarily difficult because the wavelength is big, large, and you will need antenna spacing. So there is, all of that requires good isolation. So that's a challenge. Second is you bring in millimeter wave, and then you have more antenna elements that can be accommodated, of course, because of the smaller bandwidth. But there are challenges due to metal casing, as the radiation energy would be confined inside the substrate instead of being radiated. So if you do metal casing, then it will be confined within. So what kind of substrate needs to be designed to be really realizing this kind of a real 5G terminal? And of course, there are other components like a display driver, for example, right? And it can cause the RF sensitivity degradation, and we'll have to use shields for isolation. So essentially, all of this, if you see packed up into a real estate of a smartphone, it should not only be bits per hertz per joule. I mean, we talked about bits per hertz, but if you talk about a device, it should also be looking at what energy is being expended to meet that bits per hertz. And millimeter cube is coming from the size of the smartphone, right? I mean, you can have what, a 10 centimeter by a 5 centimeter kind of smartphone device. Of course, you have, because of the larger screen, you'll probably have more real estate. But look at the last component, it's the weight, because all of these packing, all of these substrate consume certain weight, right? So you have to be light. So it's a very important metric that it's not only bits per hertz, per joule, per millimeter cube, but it's also per gram. So this is an important thing. This is one of the important KPIs when the product goes out of the market, that what are you offering at what weight and what size. So these are some of the challenges that we need to keep into consideration when we talk about any technology and how it is finally realized in a device. So this is another, we talked about a tear down, right? So this is a tear down from a Samsung Galaxy S20 done by Tech Insights. You see, this is the baseband. We talked about Samsung Shannon 5123 5G modem. This is the application processor here, which is a Shannon Exynos 990 application. But this is not it. If you look at, there are so many PMIC from different vendors, NXP, Maxim. We have on silicon, on semi devices, and look at, there are front-end modules, there are various GNSS location, and various other PMICs from Shannon, RF PMIC, and so on and so forth. So all of this looks packed, right? So this is the kind of, so there are a lot of design, a lot of layout designing happening to ensure that the user actually ends up getting all of these technologies that we try to develop. So this is something that I wanted to show you. Okay, so we talked about beamforming, right? So if you look at in reality, what happens is we need not only a main lobe of a beamform from the beamforming, we would also like it to be steered, right? Because we are moving, the user is moving. Now, the moment it is steered, it is moving in one direction. We'll see that the side lobes that we previously ignored in our discussion will start interfering with the next antenna element. Now, this becomes a very important design consideration which you practically realize. So it's not only lambda by 2 that is enough. You'll have to probably do more, or probably pack something else so that the side lobes don't interfere with the next antenna element. So and this can only give you what you call it can only help you improve the SNR, right? But when we talk about MIMO, we talk about spatial multiplexing, or how do you get more than one beam to a user, right? So it's also an important consideration that we need to think, and we need to find out how do we design that, how do we design around that. So here there is a research done by Wei Huo, which talks about a hybrid beamformer. For example, if you see, this is 60 centimeter by 80 centimeter back panel of a smartphone. So what they're talking about a beamform module, but they're not using one, they're using 8. Now each of this is independently being controlled, right? So all of them have a separate DA, right? And each of that is able to generate a beam. Now, if you see this, even though you have 8 possible beam formers and 8 possible beams coming into a device, there is a challenge because user is holding it, right? And how the user holds defines which of the beam formers will be active. If you look at the figure below, the steerable beam, only 2 can be used because the user is holding it in a certain way. But if you look at the end one, the user is holding it in such a manner that the back panel is completely exposed. And this is the right right scenario in which all the 8 beamformers can be used. And this is the case where you can probably realize higher throughput for the user, right? But then we cannot expect the user will always hold it the way he is, but hence a lot of sensing, a lot of grip sensing has to be applied in the device so that the SAR is low, yet in certain scenarios, we don't really worry about SAR because the body of the human being is away from the device, and you can probably have all beams and getting steered across, right? So that's one of the practical hardware design and how the sensing or applying sensors augment a wireless communication or the baseband in this particular sense. Now, if you look at the baseband processing, we know that between 3G and 5G, there is about 100x increase in the processing, right? But if you look at how the processing should be handled, it is not only 5G that the device needs to support. It can support in certain cases 4G, certain cases 3G. So there should be a certain way to load balance. So why design our hardware in a manner that the worst case scenario is met? We have to be very specific or very choosy in terms of which components can be enabled in a scenario specific manner to be able to do some sort of a power balancing or making sure that the power is used optimally. So if you look at 3G, we could probably do with a single DSP, right? And a dual, a quad, SIMD, MAC with basic DSP filter instruction like FFT or IIR, or multiple parallel operations. And with one scalar M CPU which is basically the scalar CPU for doing the MAC processing or the radio resource control processing was enough for 3G. In case of 4G, if you look at, we had 10x increase in the processing in terms of MIMO or carrier aggregation or channel estimation happening. So we started using a multi-core DSP there, right? With more filter instruction matrix operation possible. And of course, we could still do with one multi-core scalar CPU for multitasking, but at a higher frequency or maybe which is able to do which can clock at higher CPU frequency so that we can do faster algorithms with that. But if you look at 5G, we'll not only need a multi-core DSP, which is of higher order multi-core, but we also need multiple CPU cores. It's not only a simple multi-core scalar CPU. We will need a much higher scalar CPU, which can do multiple packet transmissions or parallel packet transmissions happening across the various carrier aggregation or various carriers as possible in 5G. So all of this brings in another design, design decision that needs to be taken, that what should be my optimal multi-core DSP and multi-core scalar CPU that needs to be deployed, and whether it should be coming from one vendor like ARM, or whether I should probably do something in-house. Things like that has to runs into the mind of the designers when they actually make the semiconductors or the devices around these wireless technologies. So one of the possibilities is probably looking at we do some sort of a benchmarking, right? So for example, here we what we want to show is there are two cores running at a very high frequency, and remaining time it is idle. So whether this architecture is better, or whether we can run at a slower clock and yet be not idle. I mean, yet be not idle at all. I mean, which one is better between the two? It's a very hard question because it's a very architecture specific decision whether this will consume more power or this will consume more power. So it has to be analyzed. It is not only frequency, and it doesn't always relate to power in the same sense, because it is also related to other components that it's trying to switch on and switch off. So it may be possible that the PMIC requires much higher power than a CPU core in certain scenarios, right? So those kind of benchmarking has to happen. So and also there are two different architectures of doing multi-core. One is called symmetric multiprocessing, another is asymmetric multiprocessing. So symmetric, this is basically a shared memory amongst the CPUs, and the caches are shared, and you can operate and you can distribute your job. In an asymmetric multiprocessing, you have a master-slave architecture, right? So the slaves can do functional functions very fast, and the master can control the orchestration of these slaves, right? So that's an asymmetric multiprocessing, and there is no shared memory. So a lot of messages are basically transmitted in terms of the inter processor kind of messages that is going across, right? So that's something that needs to be taken into account, that which architecture to use when, and for which scenarios we should use asymmetric and which scenarios we should use symmetric. Now there's another study which was done for LTE by Ashok, where they were trying to look at the ARM big little architecture and see which is best fit for the different scenarios that you can have in terms of the capacity or the amount of data rate that the user equipment gets for a particular software implementation for LTE user equipment. So what they realized is one big and two little may be a good architecture under all scenarios. But again, this is something that needs to be reevaluated for NR. So this is just to show that this kind of benchmarking is also equally important for any technologist who actually goes and develops the actual system which is standardized and tries to realize a solution out of it. So all of this would be required for us to really do a very good implementation or a very power efficient implementation of the entire device. Okay, so there's another aspect which is a non-standard aspect. We call it multi-SIM design. So nowadays we are getting more than one SIMs in any device that is possible. So we can have one from Airtel, one from Jio, and so on and so forth. So, but what happens is if you want to do two transmissions and two receptions simultaneously, it increases power consumption, right? So what is typically done today is there is a sharing of the RF device between both between the two SIMs, right? Now what happens is when RF is shared, typically for certain time you would tune away from one of the networks so that only one network is received at any given point of time. So what happens is it will degrade your throughput. It will also degrade your call connection success rate, right? So then there is a nice algorithm on how to do this time sharing, right? So that's another aspect which 3GPP is also looking at, and they're now in release 17, they're looking at considering a standardization around this area. So this is another aspect of how the load balancing of the wireless equipment itself happens within the device, right? So that's an important topic that probably we can look at when you do some studies around release 17 of 3GPP, specifically for NR enhancements. So I think in the interest of time, I'll probably skip. I think I'm very close to how much time we have, madam, now? Hello. Okay. I think
yes,
I'll
yes. Another 10 minutes.
Okay. Fine. Then let me spend some time on beyond 5G and 6G, and I'll skip this image sensor, camera, and neural engine, and go there. Right. Okay. So we talked about 5G, right? And in case of beyond 6G, basically there's a lot of study happening in terms of what would be the requirement in the future in terms of mobile traffic, mobile video, what kind of use cases of super high definition will come, and what kind of super immersive multimedia requirements will happen, and what are the requirements in terms of the data rate. So if you look at for example, if you look at a super high definition video, we're talking about 256 Gbps for a 64K digital cinema uncompressed if you want to transmit over the network. If you look at a hologramic, what do you call, a video call between two persons, you'll require 1 gigabyte per centimeter cube at a 20 millisecond latency, right? So that's huge. If you talk about Super HD VR, virtual reality, there is a 13.6 Gbps requirement. Now we have already seen that a lot of these we are already experiencing, right? We are seeing remote work happening in the COVID scenario. We'll probably see a remote medical facility or remote gaming happening. So the world in the future would truly be immersive in terms of the mixed reality use cases and what kind of high fidelity mobile hologram and digital replica requirements we can only imagine, right? So in terms of the 6G requirement, this is just from a draft from ITOR. It seems that we'll be requiring a terabit per second kind of data rate, right? And even the user experience data rate would be Gbps. And of course, there would also be 10x or 100x improvement in the efficiency and mobility and spectrum efficiency and latency reduction. And with more sensing and more devices and more robotics coming into picture will require connection density of even 10 times higher than what we have today. So with these in mind, there are a lot of competing technologies. We know about, we talk about millimeter wave, right? So there is another terahertz communication, which is probably going to give us terahertz or terabits per second kind of data rate, right? So, and then there are certain network topology that needs to be changed in order to manage this kind of high capacity requirement. So some of the research, even in case of 3GPP, is happening on the non-terrestrial network. So basically from a terrestrial fixed network node, there is a discussion on bringing in high altitude platform or satellite kind of a link, so that there are certain use cases which can be enabled by satellite and certain use cases can be enabled by HAPS, and certain another set of use cases that can be enabled by an on-demand network node. So we talk in the remaining 5 minutes, I'll talk about some of our research on the aerial communication, which brings in another vertical node into the network, and what kind of improvements it can bring to the system. So the aerial communication, if you look at some of the typical use cases, is a dynamic need for increased capacity. So we have two scenarios, right? You have a stadium scenario, or you have traffic on the road, and we know that these are temporal events. This doesn't happen all the time. So how do we augment the network with an aerial link, so that for certain time of the day you can have a higher throughput or higher capacity offered to the users? So that's where the concept of aerial communication comes in. So both 3GPP and even ITOR are looking at the non-terrestrial network, and one of the concepts is basically mounting a radio access network on a UAV or a drone. And these are basically hovering kind of platforms, which are also called a low altitude platform or LAPS. So it can be added for demand-based coverage and capacity. And the most important advantage is it is a strong line of sight link, and it is immune to UV mobility because it can follow the user, right? So it can basically be following the user if that kind of a use case actually arises, right? And yeah, so with this background, if you look at what kind of problems we have realized, or what kind of problems we have addressed in our research, is we are trying to find solutions which maximizes the lap utilization, and what kind of laps usage, and how can which lap should be augmenting which users. So these two are very important problems, that how do we know where to position a low altitude platform to serve the users. So that's something that we have solved in our work. So if you look at low altitude platform, there are two ways. both the user gets data from both the aerial cell as well as terrestrial cell. So the augmented is basically like the non-standalone deployment, right? We talked about in case of 5G. So you have a dual connectivity link, and in case of standalone, the entire data is coming from from the drone. But which one is better? It depends on the use case and the kind of deployment. So one of the important problems is how to optimally position the trajectory and define the trajectory of a lap. So if you look at older work, a lot of work has happened in terms of positioning of a low altitude platform as to where can it be placed in order to give good coverage to the user, or how many drones can be deployed in the networks to optimally cover all the users in the network, or basically how to add a solar panel and try to optimize the height of the drone in such a manner that it can serve the user as well as harness the solar power. So these kind of work is mostly on the coverage planning. So there's not a lot of capacity understanding or the capacity optimization happening in terms of positioning. So in our work, what we have addressed is we have looked at this deployment where it's an augmented deployment. So we have a user which has to be served by terrestrial cell, but the terrestrial link is getting poorer. So there needs to be an augmentation with a drone cell. Now, if that is to happen, how do you position? Where do you position? Which users do you want to address? So we talk about a feedback. We call it a feedback for aerial trajectory that we are trying to design. So what it has to do is has to do a prediction of what would be the user's need in the future in terms of uplink and downlink, and what is the probability that the user will stay static in a region for a certain time, and what is the channel quality with the terrestrial cell. So if there is a high data requirement, there is a probability that the user is staying in a cell and its channel with terrestrial is going bad, then these users are the users that have to be served by the aerial cell. Now this becomes a multi-objective optimization problem in terms of location adjustment. So we try to solve this problem. So firstly, we defined a new feedback method. Now this feedback also requires the prediction of uplink and downlink buffer. So there has to be some sort of a deep learning applied in terms of what kind of packet, what kind of data rate a user is expecting, right? So what we did is we applied a long short-term memory model to look at the prediction in terms of uplink and downlink buffers requirement for the user. And then we tried to solve the multi-objective problem that we formulated in terms of where to position. Now within this problem, we tried to make a grid of 27 locations and try to optimally find which is the best location amongst those 27 locations. And we found that any available literature algorithm is inferior to our solution by up to 44%, right? In comparison to what we can do. So this was one of the work that I wanted to discuss in terms of aerial communication. And we were able to show that these kind of deployments can increase up to 10x of capacity need for any user as he's being served by the terrestrial network. So that's actually helping the capacity use case for beyond 5G kind of a network. And very quickly, I'll talk about another aspect where we are trying to maximize how the resources from an aerial cell can be shared across multiple operators. So what we talked about in terms of the deployment or positioning, we looked at the problem from one operator's positioning. Now here we are trying to extend in some sense to a multi-operator positioning, but then the sharing has to be designed. The sharing between the operators for that aerial cell, if you look at this aerial cell deployment is trying to be shared by operator 1 and operator 2, there has to be a strategy and there has to be a sharing algorithm between that two. So we have given an opportunistic sharing algorithm between two operators, and we try to show that this aerial cell can be shared using this architecture. So we talked about an aerial multi-operator core networking sharing algorithm, and then we designed so we have to again use a predictor in terms of what kind of traffic would be required or what kind of traffic can be predicted across the operators, and then position the aerial cell optimally across the operators and share the resources between the operators using the aerial sharing managers. So we could show again using the time series analysis that the long short-term memory model is very good in terms of improving the accuracy of prediction of the data traffic. And of course, using our opportunistic sharing algorithm, we can bring down both the number of aerial cells required across the multiple operators, as well as improve the utilization by 61% in terms of the aerial cell resources. So these two works were what I wanted to present in terms of the aerial cell and its readiness and its applicability in beyond 5G and 6G kind of a communication. So in summary, some of the things that we discussed on aerial communication were on efficient resource allocation and efficient resource sharing across the different operators. Even though we have looked at only high capacity use cases, the solutions can be also solved and also worked for ultra reliable low latency and massive machine type communication. And of course, we have only discussed about one lab. We can extend the work to multiple labs and again bring learning to reduce the feedback itself. And with more labs, we'll have interlab interference to be solved as another problem in the aerial communication. So that's all I wanted to present. I think I had to skip a few slides in the overall discussion, but that's fine. I think it was about how image sensors and how the neural engine also bring in new challenges that can be additionally solved in 6G. Yeah. So these are some of the references that I had used for building the 5G discussion. And on the aerial communication, there are some extensive list of tutorials and some other papers that I had referred, and also some of the work in 3GPP in terms of non-terrestrial network that I had discussed. So one of the papers that we discussed was accepted in one of the conferences from IEEE, and the other ones we are still sending to journals and other things. Yeah. So that's all. If you have questions, you can probably take now. Thank you.
Yes. Now participants can ask their questions to Mr. Tushar, or they can put their questions in the chat box.
So could you brief us a little bit about the impact of 5G on backhaul and fronthaul, that aspect?
Okay, I'm not an expert on the core network aspects, but specifically, you had any question? Then
No. So I just wanted to know about the architecture's impact on backhaul and fronthaul, so that kind of thing.
Okay, so there are new network nodes that are added. So for example, see, if you look at the functional split, largely the function remains same, but we are trying to distribute the function across newer nodes, which will manage the link, which will ensure the subscriptions are being handled properly, and which also does some sort of what you call they have a concept of network function virtualization, right? So there are certain aspects like that which are added in the core network per se, but largely from a RAN or a radio access network, the aspects that I covered doesn't really need a change in the core network architecture, except for latency reduction, which is anyways a challenge which has to be solved in the deployment.
Okay, sir. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so I can see some questions. So somebody asked, somebody asked, what is LSTM? Okay, LSTM is a neural network which is called long short-term memory model. So it is basically used for, in some cases, used for what we call language prediction. I have used it for time series analysis. Yeah, it is some sort of a recurrent neural network. If that would help you understand. Yeah. So your question is, may I know how improved with LSTM? Okay, so what we did is we looked at a seasonal traffic, right? So there is a lot of seasonality in the data traffic requirements from a user. So if we used a linear regression model like ARIMA or AR, we saw that we were having a lot of error because as 5G is getting deployed and more users are moving into the network, there is a certain aspect of seasonality that needs to be used or that needs to be detected, and that's where long short-term memory model helps. Yeah, so that's how it got improved with LSTM in terms of its accuracy. So another question is, any remark on the development of dynamic TDD in 5G NR? Okay, I'm not very well conversant with what is the current specification movement happening on dynamic TDD. So if you had any specific question, then so largely I know that dynamic TDD means that the TDD configuration also changes in terms of how much of uplink and how much of downlink resources are to be allocated on the same frequency grid.
Yeah, Mr. Tushar, any more question?
Can you share PPT? Of course, I will. I will share it with Professor Sushmita Das, and maybe she can share it back to
Yes,
all.
yes. Thank you. I'll do it.
Okay.
So thank you, Tushar, for accepting our invitation, and you nicely and clearly presented a picture of connecting dots from 5G to B5G and 6G. A very interesting topic indeed. So I hope our participants have learned a lot from this, and you also gave many research challenges and future scopes of research. So hope people will be benefited from this presentation and lecture. Thank you a lot for
Okay. Thanks a
joining
lot,
us.
madam. I just wanted to add one thing that I think if folks are from colleges and they want,
Faculties and students and
yeah.
industry people are there also.
Okay.
Some.
So I think a very good way to learn, and I also use in my free time, is to look at what kind of study items are getting proposed in 3GPP, because they are very exploratory in nature. So that's a good time to pick up on any key technology that may get standardized, and yeah, of course, it would also help us solve very industry ready kind of problems. So that's something that you can adopt, and that will also improve our expertise in this area. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll request those faculties who are here and research scholars to be connected with Mr. Tushar, such that you can discuss your research problems. He can guide you in various aspects, and industry application of your research work can be undertaken also. He will help in that. It's a very nice thing. Basically, a collaborative approach people can work with. So I'm very happy. So he's knowing his desire to work with academia. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks a
Sir,
lot for the opportunity. Yeah.
sir, does digital beamforming in 5G, does it enhance the coverage compared to analog beamforming of signals?
Okay, so if you look at the beam itself, I think it should not really matter. I think it's the method by which you do beamforming and the challenges around it, which is important for realization. But yeah, I mean, in terms of how far the beam can go, I think from physics, I think both of them are applying the same technique of applying phase shifts. So I don't see any difference there.
So the only difference between the two is analog and digital is when the phase shifts are applied, right?
Yes, yes, right.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I know, sir, what is a beam steering and
What is the beam steering? Okay, so basically it's simply put, I mean, if you want to understand, the intuition is if a user is moving, it cannot be doing beam handovers. I mean, it will try to keep monitor the same beam with the base station, right? So while the user is moving, the beam with which it is connected should also move, right? And then finally it will break. So that how much it can move and how much it can steer is what I wanted to bring in terms of steering. Is that what you asked?
Yeah, but actually I'm doubting like that. How that beam steering, how that angular movement will happen in
So yeah, so when we talk
antennas, like
right. So basically there has to be a phase that has to change, right? So previously, let's say you had phase one, or maybe across the antenna elements you have different phases. So that phase has to be applied again so that the beam angle changes, right? So that there is a continuous measurement and monitoring of how that phase shifts have to be applied across the antenna elements, and that is what enables steering, right? And that is what is required measurement for steering.
Yeah. So now that is like it's focused to particular like so beam forming beam for like beam steering nowadays in 5G it's talking. So how this how this antenna arrays like 64 antennas internally elements, how that internally that elements will rotate or what happens internally this angle movement what happens?
That's a very nice question. I think with there is also a way to move the antenna panel, but of course it's not really realized. I mean, it's not how it is done. It is actually the phase that is changed, and the phase is estimated, right? And that estimation has to be continuous. That okay, how much should be the phase that should be applied now to a later time, and so on and so forth, right?
Okay, it's a logical movement, not physical movement.
Not a physical movement, right? But yeah, if you want to relate it with a camera image sensor, you actually have I mean, it's like the same thing, right? You move the lens so that you can get close or far, right? So, but yeah, that's not physically possible. And also the rate at which it should happen is different from human vision perception, right? So it should happen much fast at more periodicity, right? So it should be applied in a feedback manner, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you then. We can end the session now. Thank you, Mr. Tushar.
Thank you, madam. Thanks for the great opportunity.
So hope to meet you in future in many occasions.
Yeah, I hope physically. It's been a long COVID scenario of work from home, virtual movement, right? Okay, madam. Thanks.